Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching the Blue Ridge Parkway video that I made with my dad. If you haven't seen it yet, you can click up here to see it for yourself. But in this video, I just wanted to share 9 tips on how to make the most of your Blue Ridge Parkway road trip. At the end, I share how much the entire trip cost for us, and if you have additional questions that I didn't cover, be sure to leave those in the comments. Let's jump into it. By far, getting to the Blue Ridge Parkway starting points is the most challenging part of this road trip. Our route started in Cherokee, North Carolina, with the most significant cities nearby being Knoxville, Charlottesville, and maybe Atlanta. All of these are at least a few hours drive from the start. I had a hard time finding flights and good rental car prices, so I ended up flying into Nashville. From Nashville, it was about 3 hours to the start of the drive, and then at the end of the drive, I drove to Washington, D.C. to drop off the car and to fly home. This is just a random way that you can do it, as you can fly into Roanoke or Atlanta or any of the other places and drive to the route, but for me, that made the most sense with the cost associated with the trip. We did the drive in 4 days, but if I could do it again, I'd probably add one more day, as we had one section that was a really long drive and it would have been nice to split that up. That being said, 4 days is totally fine, especially if you don't stop as much as my dad and I do. If you do it in 4 days, it's about 115 miles a day, plus or minus a few miles depending on how you stretch your days out. It does take longer than you'd think to do the drive, as there are overlooks and hiking trails everywhere, plus the speed limit is 45 miles an hour pretty much the entire way. If you're driving the Blue Ridge Parkway, you really want to relax and take your time, so plan for that and all the stops you want to make each day. In the video my dad and I made, we generally left at around 8 a.m. each day and got into our hotel around 6 or 7 at the end of the day. They were long days for sure, but there's over 200 overlooks and there's so many other attractions, so you definitely want to make the most of your time and see as much as you possibly can when you're on such a beautiful road trip. As you plan your route, be sure to research where the road closures are at. First of all, you can't really do this road trip in the winter, as the snow closes many of the sections, so the spring or fall is the best time to do it. Even if you do it in that time though, there'll probably still be road closures, and we had 3 or 4 detours on our drive. One of the biggest was around a 20-mile detour in the Roanoke area that had been there for almost a year. The detours are really easy to follow as they're well noted and there's lots of signs directing you in which way to go. That being said, there may be places that you wanted to stop that you're not able to access because of the road closures. The National Park Service site has information on the road closures, so be sure to watch that as you're planning your trip and before you go. Food or gas ended up being one of the most challenging things on the Blue Ridge Parkway drive. Basically, there's no food or gas outside of the major cities on most of the entire drive. That's not to say that it's hard to get food or gas, but you definitely want to research the route ahead of time to know where you can find your next gas station and where food might be. I say might because there was a few days that we planned lunch spots that were closed when we got there, so we ended up having to eat snacks. I recommend grabbing a bunch of snacks and a case of water from the grocery store before you start the drive, that way you have something if you can't find a place to eat. It's not as bad as I'm making it seem, it just does require a little bit of pre-planning for both food and gas on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Next up, hotels were not difficult for 3 out of the 4 nights on the route. Hotels in Asheville, Blowing Rock, Boone, Roanoke are all easy to find, but there's a section between Boone and Roanoke that basically has nothing, maybe one hotel or Fancy Gap or something like that. That's the day we had the longest drive, as I really wanted to stay in Peaks of Otter, and since there was nothing really in between at all, we just pushed all the way through past Roanoke to get to the Peaks of Otter. It was a really long day, and it's probably best to split it up if you have the option and try to find a place to stay in Fancy Gap or around that area. Besides that, you shouldn't really have any trouble finding a hotel, but if you want to stay in popular places like the Peaks of Otter or the Pisgah Inn, be sure to get those in advance as they often sell out. Next up, I wanted to talk a little bit about hiking, as there's so many hiking trails along the Blue Ridge Parkway. We only did a dozen or so during our trip, but there are many others that I wanted to do that I didn't get a chance to do. I'd plan 2, 3, 4 hikes a day depending on your fitness level, and noting that many of the hikes are not usually long but are almost always very steep. Most of the popular hikes are honestly less than a mile or 2, but they're uphill the entire way, and they're some of the steepest trails I've done in a long time. In terms of my favorite hikes, there are so many great ones, but Crabtree Falls, Humpback Rocks, and Craggy Pinnacles are all ones that stood out for me. I would say we generally had phone data reception about 75% of the route. More often than not, we could use our phone map to plan our next stop, but there was a few sections where it was a little spotty. I had downloaded a map for offline use so I could see it even without reception, and we had a book that we used that would show us what was ahead of us on the route as well. Overall, it was basically a non-issue, but I do want to note that there are some sections where you won't have any reception. When planning the trip, definitely plan for any type of weather. We got pretty lucky and had basically sunny days on our trip, but there was one morning where we had a ton of fog and you couldn't even see any views from the overlooks. When I was researching the trip beforehand, I saw rain on the schedule pretty much every day, but somehow we got lucky and got a lot of sun. That being said, when we got off the route and went to Shenandoah, it basically poured on us for half the day. So plan for anything, plan for rain, possibly snow, heat, humidity, all of that when you're on the route, and bring the right clothes for that type of weather. Lastly, one of the main questions I get is how much something like this costs, and here's a cost breakdown of everything we spent on our road trip. Our total cost ended up being around $2,700, with the main cost being the flight and the rental car. Hotels were not bad and food was basically non-existent since we couldn't even find a place to eat half the time and ate snacks a lot for our lunches. The main thing that's going to determine the cost for you is deciding where you're going to fly in and out of and how to get the best deal on a rental car. For us, it ended up being Nashville to Washington, D.C., but for you, maybe it'll be Atlanta to Charlottesville. Who knows? If you want additional information on the Blue Ridge Parkway, plus a map with all the stops that we went to, I made an ebook that you can purchase in the description if you're interested. Let me know if you have any other questions on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and we will see you on the next video.